Hello and welcome to another European Agenda program. Today we are here in Strasbourg, European Parliament, and right now in the European Parliament General Chamber, the title of the meeting is the Turkey's airstrikes to Northern Syria as well as Northern Iraq, and the MEPs are giving speeches about Turkey's war crimes and invasion to the Rojava and airstrikes as well. We will listen to the MEP speeches now.
The first speaker for the groups is Ms. Asimakopoulou.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε, κυρία Επίτροπε. Οι βομβαρδισμοί στη Συρία αλλά και στην Κουρδική...
Thank you, Chairman. The bombing in Syria in Kurdish Iraq show that the aggression of Turkey is a European issue problem. We Greeks, men and women, have to face this volatile and unpredictable behavior of a neighbor who is very far from European values, but also disregards systematically international law. I'm wondering, ladies and gentlemen, what are we expecting to respond decisively to Turkish provocative stance? Thank you.
Sanchez Amor.
The next speaker is Mr. Sanchez Amor.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President.
Parecen beneficiarle. Vamos a...
How can we accept that you have a country that says to prevent some future danger would invade a country and violate an international border, calling it a special military operation? And I'm not talking about Russia here. I'm talking about a blatant violation of international rights by Turkey. Operations have been launched in both Syria and Iraq. Now, when does an operation become an incursion, and when does that become an invasion, and when does that become an occupation? Do we have double standards here? Facilitating these aerial attacks that could lead to a dangerous land incursion. Now, we have heard calls for Turkey to show restraint, but would we say the same thing to Russia? It's double standards. Thank you.
Herr Jan Christoph.
Thank you. Jan Christoph Özlem. Thank you, President, Madam Commissioner, colleagues. In my view, it's equally clear that the military attacks which were carried out as so-called retribution or reprisals for the attack in Istanbul were carried out in Syria and northern Iraq. Such attacks must also be condemned in equally strong terms. These attacks targeted the Kurdish civilian population. I call on Turkey to give priority now to de-escalating the crisis. During the war in Syria, Kurdish fighters, both male and female, spearhead the fight against Islamic terrorism in Syria, fighting on our side against those terrorists. And that's something we shouldn't forget or indeed negotiate on. We should call on Turkey now to show moderation. It's unacceptable for them to act in this way.
Next.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Fransua Alfonsi.
Monsieur le Président.
President, thank you. Where are you, Mr. Borrell? The High Representative to the EEAS, did he not understand that Erdogan is sparking war in Syria? There was a programmed invasion of this area and violating international law, as well as threatening civilians. And despite IS, we've seen that the Kurdish people there are starting a true democracy. This is so dangerous for the area as a whole, but for the world too. And the thinking is that there would be some tens of thousands of Islamists that will be let free and they will be able to reconstitute IS. Is this something that we can let happen? If not, we need to mobilize very quickly. We must stop the airstrikes on the north of Syria by setting up a no-fly zone as was done under the auspices of the UN for Iraqi Kurdistan. This area has never been a threat to Turkey. It's quite the contrary.
Our next speaker is Monsieur Thierry Marianne.
Turkey is coming closer to Damas while supporting the illegal occupation by Islamists in the region and has supported the enemies of the Syrian government.
Thank you, Miss Özlem Demirel. Thank you, President. An old Christmas song in Germany says, "Every year once again," and children love singing this song. However, let's just spare a thought for the children in Syria and Rojava. Those children are sad, they're mourning because every year bombs come down on their heads. Every year the Erdogan regime attacks Kurds in Iraq and Syria. And every year muted complaints come from the European Union. Miss Daly, you talked about the right of Turkey to respond to the terrorist attacks. Let me say to you, what have those Kurds in this region got to do with those terrorist attacks? Except that they were actually involved in the fight against IS terrorists a few years ago. Look at the way we've reacted to Russian attacks on Ukraine. Enormous diplomatic efforts. Meanwhile, nothing happens when it comes to our NATO partner Turkey's acts. It's become increasingly clear. The European Union doesn't care about crying children. All it cares about is its objectives to protecting itself from people fleeing such terror of refugees. Yet another example of the double yardstick of the European Union. Colleagues, the Erdogan regime wants to extend its attacks to include ground troops. This is not acceptable. We have to adopt a clear position on this. The European Union could do so much. Mr. Borrell isn't even here today in this debate. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing short of unacceptable.
Und das Wort hat unser Kollege Fabio.
The next speaker, Mr. Fabio Massimo Castaldo.
Grazie, caro Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. Now, all of the signals show us that the intentions of Erdogan go beyond just retribution for the attack of Istanbul. And indeed, we haven't seen any evidence in his accusation. This is a threat of a new incursion into Syria. Colleagues, where is our red line? Cyprus and Greece for years have been the victims of the aggression of Erdogan. And despite Ukraine, what is happening in Ukraine, we can see that Turkey is not imposing the sanctions. And then we see what's happening with the attack in Iraq with chemical weapons likely used against the civilian people. There's been blackmail against Sweden and Finland as well in order to lift the veto against the entry into NATO of our two member states. We have to take a strong position. The Council needs to do that, and the High Representative as well. Now, colleagues, we are counting all on you. We know that we sent a letter to the High Representative Borrell, and we are still awaiting the reply. Commissioner, will you assist with the humanitarian crisis in Syria and all of the refugees that will come to us when ISIS is reinstalled there? Thank you.
Am Wort ist Frau Isabel Santos.
Não, o combate ao terrorismo não pode.
Combating terrorism cannot be used by Erdogan for electoral reasons and to send indiscriminate airstrikes to the north and northwest of Syria and in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Let us be clear. Attacks on vital infrastructure and the civilian population, Erdogan is attacking the Kurdish people. And extending his plans for policy in the region. The international community cannot put up with this, cannot allow these attacks that create instability in Syria and in the region and increase the insecurity, hurting already martyrized people. In Ukraine, like in Ukraine, we must make sure that here too we assist in the survival of the people. Therefore, I should like to make an appeal to the member states to defend in the United Nations the humanitarian corridor for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker, Katrin Langensiepen.
Dear Commission, I'm searching for Mr. Borrell. Where are you when it comes to Syria? I'm looking for you because I have questions. When it comes to Syria, Syria is a bleeding country. And I was there a couple of weeks ago with some colleagues, and we visited different places in northern East Syria. And I went to Al-Hol, the camp where thousands of Daesh fighters, some of them with European citizenship, by the way, we have to take them back, it's our responsibility, are prisoned. And now Turkey is bombing northern East Syria, is bombing or attacking Al-Hol. We fought against terrorism, Kurds fought against terrorism, and now that region is in danger. We all are in danger. So stop bombing, Mr. Erdogan, northern East Syria, because Syria now is not safe, and if Syria is not safe, we are not safe. Thank you.
Next speaker is Anthony Comín y Oliveres.
Thank you, President. Turkey comes to the Union saying that it would be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine, but actually we can see that it is a huge threat to Europe's security. And we've seen the airstrikes in Northern Syria and in the Kurdish region of Iraq. And the Kobane Pediatric Hospital was bombed. We've seen plans by Turkey in the Kurdish areas that will have humanitarian repercussions that will be extremely serious. But we know that the Kurdish people were our best ally in fighting the terrorists there, and therefore this will put the whole region and us in danger. Turkey also threatens militarily attacking a member state of the EU. We have a huge problem with this country, therefore. We have to understand who protects Turkey in the EU. Why is Mr. Borrell not here? Why have we seen the echoing of this policy in Spain?
Dominic Ruiz de Veza. You are the next speaker.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, President Karas. Dear colleagues, on this particular issue, I share the condemnation that has already been stated with regards to the offensive carried out by the Turkish government in Iraq. Now, this is not the first time that we have seen a violation of Iran's national sovereignty by Turkey, and we need to investigate the possible use of chemical weapons by the Turkish armed forces, because we know that this is banned under international law. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a nascent democracy here with a lot of problems. There has been an electoral process. It took a year to form a government. The path forward is not the right one that's been taken by Turkey.
The next speaker, Bernhard Simniok.
Herr Präsident, seit 2016.
President, since 2016, Turkey has carried out 3 major military operations against Syria. Anybody who's followed Erdogan's actions closely would realize these most recent attacks our trial for a ground offensive. A few days ago, the Turkish president threatened to launch missiles on Athens. This gives something to worry about. Where's our famed solidarity, EU solidarity with other member states? Turkey. Will we give in once again to the Turkish president's blackmail? Turkey is profiting once again from the helplessness of an amateurish European Union. Our promises aren't worth the paper they're written on. Leaders in the European Union are clearly too busy with filling their bank accounts with black money from Qatar. They have no care about protecting European nations. We have to tell Turkey where its borders actually are. The Turkish army has to be withdrawn from Syria, and those responsible for the events in Idlib should be tried in Turkey. On the contrary, we should normalise our own relations with Syria and bring the useless sanctions to an end. They are simply extending the suffering of the civilian population. This would not only bring about a stabilisation of the whole region, this would also give millions of Syrians the opportunity to go back to their home country. A stable Syria is the prerequisite for peace in the Middle East, and we, as Europeans, can only gain from that. Moving on to the next speaker, Evin İncir.
The memory of the international community seemed to be short. The EU is once again silent while crimes of atrocity against Kurds are taking place. Turkey's bombs have been falling down on the Rojava region of Syria and the Kurdistan region of Iraq. It is the same Kurds that have sacrificed their lives for also our freedom here in the EU in the struggle against terrorism. Turkey's bombs have crumbled years of struggle against the most heinous terrorist organization on this planet, against ISIS. But yet, silence is the choice of the international community. EU must demand a no-fly zone over the Rojava region and act to end the Turkish aggression against the Kurds in the different parts before it's late.
Andreas Schieder is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, President, Madam Commissioner. For about a month and a half ago, I went with some colleagues from the European Parliament to this region where the Turkish bombs are falling. What we need is a little bit of stability, of civility, of freedom. If we look at the northeast of Syria in the autonomous region, you also have the Kurdish part of Iraq that are suffering brutal attacks from Turkey in this region. There are attacks perpetrated with chemical weapons against the population. And there are also risks that the IS fighters held could be freed again, up to 12,000. So we need to act urgently here. We need to act when it comes to these attacks from Turkey. There needs to be a no-fly zone, and there needs to be a conference where everybody sits as equals around the table to discuss the future of Syria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kostas Mavridis.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the 20th of November, Turkey launched a major air offensive attack in Rojava, Syria, and the Kurdistan region of Iraq, which continues uninterrupted against targets, including civilians and infrastructure. This was portrayed by Turkey as a response to the bombing attack a few days earlier that was attributed to the Kurds. Since then, though, the Turkish narrative has changed a few times, and despite inconsistencies and contradictions, the request by HDP for a full investigation has been rejected by the government coalition in the Turkish parliament. The Turkish government has been using the bombing attack as a pretext to attack the Kurds, despite the strong suspicion, which is more than probable, of a Turkish intelligence involvement. The ongoing attack in Syria and Iraq is another blatant violation of international law, just like in the Aegean against Greece and against Cyprus, despite the ongoing military occupation of Northern Cyprus. Enough is enough. The long-standing appeasement policy has failed, and EU has to act strongly to stop the Turkish aggression now.
Unser nächster Redner ist Herr Nikos.
The next speaker, Nikos Androulakis.
Turkey is bombing once more the Kurds in northern Syria. The Kurds that stopped the Islamic State, this terrorist organization that left thousands of dead in its wake, and hundreds of dead in Europe as well as thousands in Syria. But it seems we forget very easily, and we're only observers of these violations of international law. Turkey is also the only NATO country that has not sanctioned Russia. They are the ones that are right now blackmailing Finland and Sweden in order to enter NATO. They even threatened Greece with the missiles they are making. I mean, is this the behavior of an allied country? What more do they have to do so that you will finally act? The least you could do is immediately start an arms embargo against the Erdogan regime.
Thank you very much. We now come to the Catch the Eye. There are 3 speakers. I start with Miss Anna Miranda.
Gracias, presidente. ¿Dónde está el señor?
Thank you, President. Where is Mr. Borrell? He should be putting pressure on Turkey for the attacks, and that we will not just accept the Turkey narrative in the autonomous region of Rojava, and that the assistance should be given to make sure that we have an internationally recognized no-fly zone, and be actively working to reopen peace negotiations. Turkey has had 3 invasions in the north of Syria. 2 meant that there was an occupation of areas, and these Turkish occupations will mean that there are these areas are no longer safe, where previously people were able to live in peace. And these are and this has now become one of the most violent places in the world. And we know what the Kurdish people have done in their fight against ISIS. We've forgotten much, I believe. The Kurdish people fought against ISIS, and now this region is being converted yet again into a threatened and violent area. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We hear a lot these days about the rules-based international order. Well, Turkey's action in northern Syria and Iraq is a very good example of that in practice. It's one rule for NATO members and one for everyone else. Turkey has invaded northern Syria, slaughtered the Kurds there, annexed and occupied Syrian land. Turkey has rolled over them in NATO tanks, bombed them with NATO aircraft. Its NATO troops, wielding NATO weapons, have driven them from their homes. Yet the West calls the Kurds allies, even as it arms and supports Turkish savagery against them. And when Turkey goes in again, what can we expect from the EU and the US? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why would we, when already they stand by and starve and murder Syrian men, women and children with their illegal sanctions? Western Imperium has no friends, only interests, but you're playing a very dangerous game.
Danke. Unser letzter Redner ist Herr
And the last speaker is Mr. Papadakis.
Η απαράδεκτη εισβολή της Τουρκίας στη Συρία.
The unacceptable invasion of Turkey into Syria and northern Iraq has grave consequences for the peoples of the area and makes the situation even more complex. We could have dangerous changes in the border. The US, the EU, NATO, Russia really want this fight to take place because it's within their own interests. Now, we have Turkey also threatening Greece because it is antagonizing the Greek bourgeois class. Our so-called allies are just telling us, find a solution between you. So these are the kind of allies the bourgeois classes have. So we need to move the people so that no borders will change.
Nun die Frau Kommissarin Daly ihre Abschlüsse.
We have listened to the MEP's condemnations as well as the calls to Turkey to stop that invasion attacks as soon as possible, immediately, and no-fly zone over the Rojava as well. The meeting is still continues, and as a media Haber TV, the European agenda will bring on the screens the developments. And see you on the next European agenda program.